Hey everyone, welcome to this week's reading of Shard of the Sun. Happy St. Patrick's Day as well. I'm wearing green. Uh, we are picking up with chapter 18, so just go ahead and get started. Chapter 18. The next morning, just before sunrise, Broderick and a troop of 5 soldiers left Muirwood heading east. They each rode a swift mount and followed the same road he had taken with Kira, planning to bypass Ravendale without stopping. He had no desire to see Morrill again. The place also reminded him of Kira's betrayal, and he would just as soon forget about it. The soldiers were lively and excited to be on the road. They each took turns telling Broderick stories of war and battle, and especially of their own epics. Broderick enjoyed their company, and he was glad his cousin insisted on sending them along. Initially, he had decided to go alone, but was glad that he didn't. Having them to talk to and keep him company made the miles go by faster. I love working for Lord Derek, but we are all adventurous. Opportunities like this help break up the monotony. We're also fattening up standing around and guarding the fields. This will give us the chance to rehone our skills. Do you know how to handle a blade? One of the soldiers, Mark, asked. I know a little, Broderick admitted, though not enough to defend myself against someone trained like you. I'm a woodsman by trade, and have never had the need to learn. We must change that, Mark winked. I'll train you myself. As the hours passed, he learned a considerable amount about the soldiers he traveled with. Mark was the leader of the small unit. He looked young, but his features belied his age. He was in his late 30s, with brown hair cut in the current style of middle-class citizens. He wore a drab brown tunic under a shirt of chainmail, trousers of a similar color, and black leather boots. His experience in warfare was substantial, having been a soldier since he was 18. He had served under a few lords who sought to expand their holdings, aided in several of the attempts to drive the goblins from the hills where he and Kira had been attacked, and had been chosen to oversee the defenses of Mirwood. There were also there was also Ged, an older fellow. Roger guessed the man to be in his 60s. He stood over 6 feet in height, was bald, and sported a thick gray beard that hung past his neck. He wore a tan leather cuirass and brown pants, as well as the same black leather boots as Mark. He carried a claymore which measured over 4 feet long. The sword had a crossguard that consisted of 2 downward curving arms and 2 large, round, concave plates that protected the foregrip, resembling an open clam. He may have been the oldest of the 5, but Broderick had no doubts that Ged was just as deadly as the others. Joel was the youngest, having just had his 19th birthday. He was Mark's apprentice, studying under him to learn battle tactics and warfare. He was from a wealthy family of a city Broderick had never heard of. He would train under Mark for another 2 years, and then return home to take up arms for the city's lord. His armor was similar to Ged's, but he wore chainmail under his cuirass. He claimed it was too heavy and hard to move, but Mark insisted on him wearing it to condition his body. The other 2, Callow and Ewan, were brothers. Callow was the elder of the 2, but Ewan was more experienced and had recruited his brother into the military life. They likely could have passed for twins, as they so resembled one another, but Callow was a year older. They were both blond, with the same haircut style as Mark. Both were evenly matched in height, but Ewan was by far the more muscular. They each wore a leather cuirass like Ged's, but Callow's was a shiny, polished black hue, and Ewan's was silver. Their armor was emblazoned with their family crest on the chest, a griffin standing on its back legs holding a red flag in its beak. Callow wielded a battle axe, while Ewan favored a flamberge. We shall make camp at dusk, if that is well with you, Mark asked Broderick. Indeed it is, Broderick replied. He would be glad to get some rest. When they stopped for the night, they had left the caves that housed the goblins a fair distance behind them. Ged and the other 2 brothers had stopped to run a quick search through some of the hollows, but didn't come across any of the vile creatures. After they met back up with Broderick and the others, they set about lying out bedrolls and building a fire. They ate a small meal that consisted of bread and a rabbit, which Callow had caught in the caves, and Mark set the order of who was to stand watch, and the rest laid down to sleep. Broderick closed his eyes, but he couldn't fall asleep. He thought about Kira and the dilemma they faced. He truly hoped that he would be able to find a way to save the baby. He was unaware of how long it was before he finally fell asleep. His dreams were filled with eerie scenes and monsters rampaging across the land, slaughtering children. His eyes shot open as he woke suddenly. Mark was standing over him, the hint of a grin tugging at his lips. Ready for your first lesson? He asked. Roderick sat up and looked around. Everyone had already Everyone was already up and ready to get back on the road. Rise early often? Roderick returned, rising out of his bedroll with a grunt. That's the life, Mark answered. Eat and prepare yourself. For what? Sword lessons. Sweat rolled down Roderick's face. The morning was cool. The physical exertion was brutal. Mark was a great teacher, though he showed no mercy and didn't give Roderick a break. Water, Roderick asked after an intense flurry of blades. There are no breaks in war, Mark replied. He came at Broderick again, slashing and twirling so gracefully Broderick doubted he would ever be as adept as the soldier. This isn't war, Broderick returned, breathing heavily. He dropped his sword to the ground. I give. Mark laughed and sheathed his own blade. You are a quick learner. You should be proud of yourself. Even Joel couldn't defend as well as you after his first few months of training. Broderick retrieved the water skin from his mount. He splashed some on his face, then drank deeply. He stripped his shirt off and wiped the water from his face. Folding the shirt, he stashed it in a pouch on his saddle. We're ready if you are, Mark said. Broderick shook his head in disbelief. You don't need a break? Mark smiled and was about to answer, but Broderick waved his hand and said, I know, I know. There are no breaks in war. You're a quick learner, Mark said again. Broderick climbed onto his horse and they got back onto the road. Where exactly is this forest? He asked Mark. The soldier pulled a map out from his saddle and unrolled it. It's further east than I have been. It is roughly a few hours from the citadel. Broderick raised his eyebrow. As in, the citadel? Where Raven died? Mark nodded. The same. As I said, it's further east than I've been. It shouldn't be hard to find, but the map shows the main road passing next to the forest. It should take 2 weeks at this pace, but I think it would do us well to stay at any inns we pass. When our supplies run low, we will need to replenish them. And I have found inns to offer the best deals. If you would like to stop anywhere, just let me know. No, I would like to get there as quickly as possible. Your plan is fine with me, so long as we aren't wasting time anywhere. Unfortunately, this journey isn't for leisure. I can't explain why. I hope you understand. No need to explain. We're here for your protection. Whatever your desire, we shall do it. Broderick was satisfied with that. He couldn't wait for the 2 weeks to come and go. Time at this point, in his opinion, was the most valuable commodity, and it didn't feel like he had enough. As the days blurred together, Broderick began to think less of his problems. The soldiers were constantly talking with him, which kept him from drawing into the dark depths of his mind. Mark also continued teaching him in the art of the sword. They passed through small towns, including the town where Broderick had listened to the old man who had seen the wizard. In the back of his mind, Broderick feared Farron would show himself and try to kill him. He knew it was a foolish thought, but he had seen the crazed look in Farron's eyes. That man is capable of so much, he thought. They passed through the town without incident, however. The road forked north toward Yurn, where Farron's fortress resided, and the other east toward their goal. As they traveled further in the direction of the forest, the towns became further spaced apart, until eventually there were no signs of civilization at all. The map shows 3 towns we should have passed through. Did we possibly miss another road? Mark asked aloud. Roderick thought about it and decided he hadn't seen any other path. He said as much to Mark, and they continued on despite their reservations. After another mile, Broderick noticed flowing water. It turned into a stream that ran along the right side of the road. They stopped to let their mounts drink and to refresh themselves in the shallow water. Mark was studying the map again with a puzzled look on his face. Broderick walked over and peered at the map with him. What is it? He asked. Mark pointed to a line on the map. This is the road we are on. Here. He pointed to another line, which ran alongside the first. Is the stream that we see before us. And this, he moved his finger to a darkened circle, is a town that should be where we are standing. This doesn't make any sense. Roderick looked up from the map and surveyed their surroundings. He was right. There should be a town or at least a village, but there was nothing. I don't even see remnants of buildings, Roderick said. How old is that map? Mark flipped the map over and viewed the inscription. It was drawn up a year ago, he answered. That can't be right. How could everything just disappear in a year? Roderick shrugged. He didn't have an answer to that. They ate a small meal and continued their trek. Broderick lost himself in his thoughts as they traveled on, thinking about his home in the woods and the repairs needed. Perhaps Kira will want to live there with me. Roderick from a, fr- was awakened from his reverie when he noticed they had stopped. His own horse had even ceased going forward. What is it? He asked, looking about. No one answered, but after a moment he realized the same thing. There was no sound. No birds sang, no crickets chirped. It was almost as if the wind itself didn't move. All was still. This place is cursed, Ged muttered under his breath. No one said anything. Roderick wondered if Ged was right. The horses seemed reluctant to go forward, but finally conceded to their master's urgings. The landscape changed dramatically. Where there should have been vibrant trees were only dead stumps. Soil was blackened as if it had been burned. Finally, the horses refused to go any further. They all dismounted. The stream had turned to a dull red color, and no fish could be seen. Chills crept up Roderick's flesh, making him involuntarily cringe. He knelt down and pressed his finger into the dark soil and held it up before his eyes. It was not ash. It was black dirt. He stood back up and brushed his finger off. They all stood in silence, looking around at the dead landscape. What could cause such destruction? Broderick asked, barely speaking above a whisper. Mark shook his head slowly in answer. Where are we? In response, Mark handed the map over to him. Broderick looked it over and shook his head in disbelief. This is the divine forest, he answered himself. All right. That's it for chapter 18. Hope you guys are still enjoying the story. Be back next week with some more chapter readings. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.